The steel ribs of the factory glowed in the first tired light, silent but for the whine of fluorescent bulbs and the scuff of boots on concrete. It was dawn in Seoul, one of those chill April mornings when the city's breath rises in vapor and even machines seem reluctant to wake. I watched the time clock from the back of the line, still sticky with old oil, still waiting for my shift to end, when the foreman appeared with a clipboard in hand and a face like yesterday's newsprint. He barked names. Mine was the last. I knew what was coming. Everyone no longer quite met my eye. We'd heard about the layoffs, of course. Talk ran along the lines in whispered ragged knots all night. Still, when he called me to the stained table and waved me into the cramped office where the glass was frosted with grime, my heart kicked against my chest wall like an angry shoat. Kim Min-yi, he said, and looked at me through little red-rimmed eyes. You're a hard worker, but you're dreaming too much. Always humming, always scribbling. The room felt airless. I waited for his pen to drag across my last schedule in thick looping Hanja. This is the work you give up, he said, as if I had laid it down in the night and he was just collecting the pieces. I nodded. He wanted me to bow, but my pride would not let me. My hands, so calloused and chemically rough from weeks scraping composite resin, closed into fists. Outside, the workers were already drifting away into the pale blue-tinted day. I tucked the thin envelope, my meager severance, into my pocket and started the long walk home through Dongdaemun's piled crates and damp cardboard. The city around me rumbled to life. Vans backing up, ramen carts stewing, a radio spitting out a trot song from some broken window above. But for me the day did not begin. Something in me had ended. I lived with my parents and my sister near Haichwa, in the cramped half-basement you could barely stand in. That morning I paused on the threshold, uncertain. The leftover stew on the stove didn't tempt me. My mother, hair twisted in a clip, met my eyes and knew. You lost your job, she said simply. I nodded. She said nothing, but her jaw tightened in that way I hated, as if she'd expected nothing else from me. I left my boots by the door and slipped into my room, shut the door on the silent apartment. Later, she came in with awkward steps and left a bowl of rice near me. You need to find real work, Min-yi, she offered, as if I hadn't just been doing that. My only reply was to pull out the old spiral-bound notebook I kept beneath my pillow. Inside, sketches of violins, mandolins, and guitars, some knotted with lines for curves and arches, others with measurements, ideas. I stared at one for a long time. My hands drifted up and I traced the imaginary outline in the air. The black graphite smeared my finger. My father came home late, a heaviness in each step. Over dinner he didn't mention the job, but when my sister, Yuna, spoke about her finals and her hopes for university, he nodded prideful, as if all hope now rested on her head. Afterward, when she was washing up, I heard her voice through the thin wall, low and harsh. Stop wasting time on your little toys, Oppa, we can't eat your drawings. Humiliation prickled up my neck. For months it had gone like this, evenings of stifled talk, days spent scouring job ads, afternoons hiding at the local library with woodworking manuals checked out in my lap. Dad would sigh and say, look at your cousin, fixing phones, making money. Why would anybody pay for a wooden violin when you can buy one in Sinchon for 30,000 won? Night after night, fear and defiance twisted in my gut. My hands ached to shape something beautiful, something alive. My family's scorn pressed on me like the factory's old vapor. Sometimes I pressed the curve of my thumb into my palm, remembering how wood yielded, scarf joints and scrolls, the hush of fine shavings curling from a sharp chisel. The shame, though, was harder than wood. Everyone knew eventually about Min-yi with his foolish ideas. In the small alleys, aunties watched and sighed over their gates. At church during Saturday dinners I saw the look, the barely hidden wonder of what I would do next, what sturdy failure would bring me back to reality. Once an uncle clapped me on the shoulder, nearly friendly. How's your stick carving, Min-yi? Any millionaires want your K-Kot-D flower stick? Laughter, even Yuna joined, quick to duck behind a ladle. That night I left the house and walked the courtyards for hours, the city muttering above and around, neon washing up on brick. From the dark behind the local violin shop's window, I stared at the lacquered bodies lined up. I pressed my palm to the glass and swore I would one day put my work on a shelf like that. The library helped, at least for a while. The woodworking section was my refuge, old books with spines snapped, binders fat with plans and patterns. I read everything on Italian luthiers, hand tools, the physics of strings. The words Stradivarius and Guarnery hung in my mind like distant, perfect bells. Money was another matter. I took odd jobs, loading ramen at the wholesale house, clearing tables at a samgyeopsal restaurant, even helping repair old office chairs in drowsy backroom shops. every spare one I hoarded. Each night I catalogued my savings on torn paper, counting and recounting. When I finally had enough, I found a woodworking club that rented benches by the hour. My first workshop was a shared table in the corner, with the hum of strangers' saws and music blaring from a cracked speaker. I begged battered spruce from carpenters' offcuts and scrounged pine from construction debris. Still, my first real violin looked like a school project, rough, awkward, shiny in all the wrong places, but the shape was true. The heart was true. I worked late and came home smelling of glue and wood dust, hands streaked with cuts. Some nights I pressed my ear to the new violin in the cell-like dark of my room, coaxing out a hesitant note, thin but trembling with hope. I kept every mistake, every cracked top, as proof that I existed beyond their laughter. On my 24th birthday, Dad gave me a shirt 2 sizes too big, with a muttered, "You'll need this when you work somewhere real." I thanked him. That night, after they all slept, I brought out my third violin, the first one I dared not hate. The next week, I brought it to the violin shop I'd lingered outside all those months. The owner, Lee Seongjin, was notorious in the district for his sharp tongue and impossible standards. He tested my violin with a practiced eye, plucking and bowing, humming tunelessly. I wrung my hands and waited for the verdict. "It's heavy," he said, "and the scroll is wrong, but it sings. What did you use for the top?" "Old pine," I admitted. He coughed, almost a laugh, and tapped the F-holes lightly. For a long moment he stared at me, then offered the kind of nod hard men reserve for the hopelessly stubborn. "Leave this with me," he said. "Come back in 2 weeks." I waited, my nails chewed raw, my heart sick. I deep-cleaned the kitchen and ran every errand I could, desperate to distract myself. When I returned, he smiled and pointed to the window. There was my violin proudly displayed above the shop sign, a red tag hanging from it. "Artisan soul-made, try me." Incredulous, I looked at him. "Already sold," he said simply. "A teacher up the hill," she said it reminded her of her father's sound. My knees threatened to give out. He must have seen it because he grinned wider. "When you build another, bring it here, and next time less glue." That night I drank alone in the park. It was the best night of my life, the air thick with wet grass and promise. But one violin did not make a living. I spent a year straddling lines, carving by night, working menial jobs by day, constantly cobbling scraps. But the shop's window proved a talisman. My second and third instruments sold. Then a parents' group from the local music school commissioned 3 fractional violins for children. A concert violinist tried one, then whispered my name to her friends. By 26, I was renting a workshop in a basement in Yuljiro, the woodworkers' quarter, a dusty warren of bench saws and hope. The men in the club started calling me the violin doctor. Somewhere along the way, my hands became deft. My sense of curve and arc grew sharp. I apprenticed under Master Kim, a legend, until he retired and trusted his old clients to me. But at home, nothing changed. My parents never came to see my work. Yuna boasted of her job at a marketing firm on Gangnam, but lowered her voice when neighbors asked about me. "He's still making things," she'd say, as if I were twisting wires in the dark. We still lived together, but our worlds barely touched. I paid rent, said little, and hid my victories in silence. Sometimes, walking home late amid neon reflections, I wanted to storm into the kitchen and lay my first payment on the table like a medal. But the moment never came. My mother's eyes, always anxious for proof, kept me silent. Years sped by. Seoul changed, glass towers, more tourists, even a foreign violin shop in Insadong with imported luthiers. Still, I kept my bench, my old radio, sawdust like snow in my hair. One spring, a student from a music university knocked on my door and asked for a master's instrument. His orchestra was touring Vienna and New York. We spent hours measuring the arch, debating maple, feeling for warmth in the grain. He watched as I worked, sweat running down my cheekbones. When I delivered it, he cried quietly, hands clutching the unfinished wood as if it were his own heart. Word spread. A music critic interviewed me for an arts magazine, the color supplement of the Chosun Ilbo. Photographs of my hands, arms dusted with wood, appeared on glossy paper. The shop windows now showed 2 or 3 of my pieces at a time. Orders came from as far as Busan. I found myself offering apprenticeships, guiding other odd souls who, like me, played with tools and hope. Yet I never once brought my family to the shop. I imagined the laughter, the eye rolls, the old jokes about wooden shoes and wooden heads. My victories were silent, private, the way secret songs are sung in empty rooms. Then came the call that changed everything. It was Yuna, Sunday morning, the smell of kimchi jjigae in the air. Oppa, some embassy they sent a letter for you, I'll scan it. I hurried home. Laid out on our patched kitchen table with the family's laundry piled nearby was a heavy envelope with an official seal in blue and gold. I opened it and read 2 lines of exquisite English and halting Korean. The Vienna Philharmonic was seeking a demonstration of Korean luthiers. They wanted my violin for a special concert. Airfare and hotel, a stipend, all paid. I stared at the letter while my mother hovered nearby, hand on her hip. What is it? They want to buy something. My hands shook as I tried to explain. To my surprise, Dad listened. His face, usually so closed, opened with wonder when I read the words. Austria like Mozart, he said dumbly. I left for Vienna in late autumn. The city was cold and luminous pale clouds drifting over the Danube. At the Musikverein, I sat in the gilded hall and listened to my violin played by a first-chair musician, watched Korean journalists snap photos, watched the conductor tip his head in approval. After the performance, at a small reception, people clapped and bowed. I held my instrument, hands tingling, and thought of Seoul's cold dawns and plywood benches. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe I had crossed some great river. When I returned, a crowd waited at the airport, journalists, students from the shop, even the rude uncle who mocked my flower sticks. Yuna stood at the edge, sheepish and excited. I smiled at her, feeling years drop from my shoulders, but what mattered was home. I invited them all, parents, uncles, skeptical neighbors, even the old church ladies who'd whispered over rice crackers, to my new workshop near in Sadong. The invitation was grudgingly accepted, disbelief still clouding every face. The Saturday of the open house, rain pattered on the windows. The workshop glowed with electric lamps smelling of polish and pine. The shelves were lined with curved beauties, violins, cellos, mandolins, all bearing my maker's stamp, Kim Min-yi Seoul. People drifted in, murmuring. My father walked the rows slowly, or in every heavy step. My mother hovered near the back, eyes moist. Then came the moment. The violinist from the Vienna performance took center stage in my shop, bow poised. As she played, the sound filled the room, warm, honeyed, and true. Old men gasped. Neighbors stared and elbowed each other. My uncle wiped his brow and shuffled closer. When the last note faded, there was silence, then thunderous applause. My mother came forward, pulling my hand into hers, holding it too tightly. Our Minyi, she said, her voice cracking wide open. My father, so solid and careful all his life, clapped my shoulder with both hands, nodding as if to fix the moment in stone. Outside, rain fell on the city, softening neon and taxi lights. Inside, the shop buzzed with warmth, relief, pride, and something brighter, a kind of forgiveness. That night, after the guests left and the instruments were all tucked away, I sat with my family. Behind our old walls, our cheap table, we ate together for the first time in peace. No one mocked, no one doubted. My mother laughed. My father poured soju, shyly proud. Even Yuna leaned over to ask about wood grain, about sound posts and varnish. I looked out the window at the rain, at Seoul burning gold through the drops, and felt the fear of all those dawns finally lift. The city was wide before me. The returns can be slow, but when they come, they are like music in your own home. My hands, scarred and stained, would never be soft, but as I cradled my cup and listened to the talk and laughter, I knew. My work had brought me home, had made room for me at the table, and that, after all the nights of rejection, after all the empty streets, was enough.